Welcome to another episode of the Respect the Path podcast with Michele and Noel. This podcast focuses on women and all things surrounding the realities of womanhood. It is based on sound, compassionate, and tough principles shared in Michele's books and workshops. Michele continually draws from those resources because she feels the urgent need to inform women of the tools she knows that can facilitate recovery from any sorrow. Michele Noel is a seeker of light, and these podcasts are Christian-based. Michele does not believe that Christendom promotes a magic wand to cure all we must experience in mortality, but that we are responsible for how we respond to both light and darkness. Michele believes that many of us do not fully appreciate the innate magnificence within ourselves. She believes that we have the capacity to build joy, better mental and emotional wellness, and physical strength. We just need the tools and the knowledge to uncover those magnificent traits. Michele provides those well-tested tools and insights. The first several episodes will cover important tools vital to women who desire to rise above the horrendous struggles they currently face in these last days. These beginning episodes will be the strong foundation for further topics. So grab your pen and a notebook, keep listening, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the forum section at michelenoelbooks.com or head on over to Instagram or Facebook to join in.
Welcome to podcast number 5. In podcast number 4, we made great progress in the definition of addiction and started our understanding of rabbit holes. If you missed that one, you might want to go back and listen to it. It's kind of important for us to follow through. The podcasts build on each other, and it makes it fun for me, and it actually, hopefully, makes things easier and clearer for you. Now, we need to shift gears for this podcast and look at the power of light, or our glory power, a little more. We talked about that in the first couple podcasts, but this is an expansion on that. And we talk about the remarkable healing which exists within us. This will expand our appreciation for light and the power that we hold as women. And this is really important. And that we have the capacity to share with the troubled world in a really fantastic way when we start to understand light at the elemental level just a tiny bit. And that expands our power to radiate even greater influences as we try to influence our own healing and the healing of others. So I'm going to read a little bit from Respect the Light. We need to define what we mean by light. It is the light that radiates through the endless universe and the power measured by particle energy. And the absence of dark, even God's power of creation or Holy Spirit, or however you view your higher power. Some of these things exist outside of ourselves, but perhaps we could internalize these ideas and envision this light, and this is important, as a vibrating life force that we were born with eons ago, a power with which we can communicate with the gods and all other creations. We might begin to appreciate its power and glory, our power and glory. The source of this power and light is the power we understand to be our Creator God or Christ, or the gods, a power greater than ourselves or anyone else. So our path to understand this light will help us move away from trying to force our minds to control with sheer grit the cycles of dark and light thinking that seem to circulate in the back of our racing brains. Instead, we will learn how to use our agency to choose light each moment with a specific thought exercise designed to stimulate new streams of light into our thinking, paradigms, or database, no matter what happens in our current circumstance. And we're working up to get that full picture of what that means, what it means to change the way we think and that discipline required in it. Oh, and by the way, I want to do a little side announcement here that we have done some huge changes in how we are going to communicate these things. And you'll notice on the website that we have taken down the in-person workshops. And that's important because now we have a wonderful avenue to put the workshops online via YouTube and Rumble and be able to do them in 20-minute segments where you can listen to them at your leisure and get the full impact of it. And they will be accompanied with slides. So it will be a visual experience also. And so I'm kind of excited about that. We'll continue with the podcasts that teach us various things from the books and the things we're wanting to discuss. But for the workshop part, we will be able to participate in a YouTube experience or a visual podcast experience. That's very exciting for us. It's been a lot of work and a lot of change, and I hope you'll be patient with us as we get this off the ground. Okay, so we need to understand that this light we're talking about in this podcast will help us move away from trying to force our minds to control with sheer grit the cycles of dark and light thinking that seem to circulate in the back of our racing brains. Instead, we will learn how to use agency to choose light each moment. That, to me, is one of the greatest gifts of God. One of the greatest things he could do for us is give us access to his creative powers and the information we need to process those. I think it is a discipline that is so magnificent that we as women need to understand so that we can appreciate the inner magnificence that we have. So if we look at light from various angles, learn from it, think about it, train our thoughts on it, and seek it in our effort to choose change, we will be assisted by the very elements of glory power we are seeking. All of us are on a path of our choosing whether we understand that power of choice or not. The cosmos responds to the choices as part of obedience to the laws of creation. We're going to talk about more of that later. Let's entertain that in our minds. The cosmos, the powers of creation, respond to these choices in our particular minds as part of obedience to the laws of creation. In other words, we influence creation by our very individual light-filled or dark-filled thoughts. It's a wonderful thing to think about, and we'll talk more about it in a minute. As we continue to do our personal translation of information about feelings and thoughts into ideas, our minds will attempt to fit them in our already formulated lens. Remember, we talked about that pre-thought and the paradigm and how important it is for us to have an open paradigm so that we do not have a straw-like view of what we're learning here. The lack of a firm thought pattern in belief that light has more power than dark is the cause of most of our apathy or pain-filled shadow thinking. I know this because I lived in that shadow mindset for a long time. I would not accept new ideas, and it almost caused my suicide. So I hope that you have open paradigms. I hope that you're willing to identify with some of the things that are said and taught so that your mind can expand. And if we are left to our carnal minds, anxiety, depression, and anger can become our label or identity, and we do not want that. Slowly, this identity takes on a life of its own, and we begin to see our true magnificence through that same narrow lens. So the point of this is that I hope that we're not too quick to throw things out, things that we hear that are new, or things that we study that are new and different. Our creative effort slackens its pace when we choose to ignore information or stuff without careful evaluation. For instance, if our lens is narrow and straw-like and we are introduced to, say, new information that we've never heard before, we may dismiss it immediately because it doesn't fit into our current and comfortable view of things. Spending a decade of severe addiction and dullness of mind, along with the impressive core of ego-driven justifications, I learned that looking through straws will lead one to thoughts of suicide. If we set new information aside, perhaps for a moment, while we continue to learn other things, we may see how the first information could then fit and even enhance our view of the world and our place in it. It can be very helpful. So be patient with learning. It's vital that we have that kind of flexible paradigm. So light thinking is a tool in our journey toward vibrant health. And this is part of the title of this podcast because we're going to talk about how our minds literally and physically affect our emotional and physical health. So I used this tool and these thinking tools to claw myself out of a number of paradigms, and I found that joy was in the work and joy was in recovery. And I hope you'll find your own magnificence and joy as you go through these things. The important thing here we have is that if we're going to talk about glory power also as part of this, because we know in our previous podcast that glory power is part of the power of God's light that helps us see our magnificence, and it reveals to our thinking minds, this is our everyday thinking mind, the reality of our innate or intrinsic or already in us strength of creative powers. And the power of light of the gods is not only illuminating our magnificent, it allows creation to exist. In other words, light is an exercise in creation, and vice versa. Creation is an exercise in light. They cannot be separated. And the reason that the gods can create is because they understand, absorb, magnify the light of the cosmos in every way. There's nothing they do not understand about light and creation. And we as poor mortals have to take what we can get and what will fit into our paradigms and our databases and try to make sense out of that creative power in our very everyday lives so that joy can be part of our lives as well as it is in the lives of the celestial gods. So we expand on that definition as a vibrating, healing power of light that resides in us. Most of the time, we're not cooperating with it because we are either not aware of its healing power or it just feels like too much work. We will work our way through these things and find that a little effort goes a long ways. If our hope is placed in our belief system as a firm trust in our glory power, then we are on our way to increasing physical and mental wellness immediately. This is because every cell in our brain and body will respond to the light we invite into our minds. If we are stuck in a dark paradigm, our thoughts will be paralyzed by the shadow filter. If we discipline our minds so that they become a channel of health-driven thoughts and belief, every cell in our body and brain will respond. This is something that if I would have known when I was in the middle of horrid addiction, it may have been a great influence in my capacity to change the way my poor little addicted mind was feeling trapped. And so I don't know if my path would have been different, but whenever we change, it's good. But we need to understand that that discipline can be ours if we will open our minds to it and we are exposed to it. And so if you know people who are suffering in a trapped, dark paradigm or thought patterns or addiction patterns, then this is where we do the work. We share a little information, and then the whole world is blessed. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Now, there's a long list of wonderful scientists which follow this discipline of light changing the way our bodies respond to health-giving thoughts, which I will share with you in the new workshop podcast. But right now, we're going to go into it a bit. Having said that, I want to give you just one resource, and this is the only assignment for today's podcast, and that is that you investigate a book and a remarkable documentary/movie video thing that Kelly Noonan Gore produced, which opens our mind and our world to the thought and belief facilitated physical and mental health elements. The book and the documentary are both called HEAL, Heal. And her name again is Kelly Noonan, Noonan, and the last name is Gore, Gore. Look it up. If you investigate and listen to that, it's only, I think, an hour or so documentary, and the book is equally fantastic. And if we open our minds to that just as a start off point, it will lead us to the scientists and different books that are out in the scientific world that are studying these things. And it will open doors for health that we cannot even imagine. One quote I will introduce you to what I mean. In the study of quantum physics, this is Gore speaking in her Heal book. Science is now proving that we are connected through a field, and all matter is actually made up of vibrating waves of energy that can shift through the influence of thought and intention. So, meaning thought and belief systems. I promise that if you take the time to investigate this information, you will feel the influence of your own glory power. Light is increased, capacity to change is increased. It's fabulous. So we begin to see that the cosmic influence we have in our power of thought because we accept the role we have been given to be light bearers. We talked about that a lot in the world. We are, in fact, sharing the glory power of our womanhood with a sorrowing and massive humanity that is suffering. So a couple of thoughts here that are a little more scientific are really important. And so I'm going to give this quote from a fellow called a scientist called Brian Greene. He wrote the book called The Elegant Universe. And he's a physicist, and he explains that Einstein's string theory suggests that everything at its most microscopic level consists of combination of vibrating strands, and that string theory provides a single explanatory framework capable of encompassing all forces and all matter. And put in a nutshell, that means that we are all connected, that the entire realm of creation is connected through these vibrating strings of light. And so when we make a choice to think in light channels, we're not just helping ourselves, but because our bodies are processing that thought through electric channels within our brains, and that all things in our bodies move through electric currents, that we also create in our bodies an electromagnetic field. And scientists can measure this in each individual, and they are explaining to us that we are actually vibrating out like 3 meters. This influence of this field of light and influence. And that's just what they can measure. So the supposition is that that influence continues to move through these waves of vibrations of light into the universe. Can we see how the gods can relate to the light that we are emanating and how we can attract light from them and they to us feel our light and love? It's the most interesting channel of discovery when we realize we're not just this little entity making an individual choice in our little minds about choosing light over dark. We are influencing all of creation and influencing goodness, not only to the people we know, not only in the household we're in, not only in the friendships we have, but the entire world of light. So if we can wrap our heads around this information, we can become a powerhouse and we can love in new ways. We can use that power to apply our creative gifts, whatever they are, in a way that magnifies humankind. This is exciting and wonderful information. And I am out of time, but to point out the fact that if the light is emanating outside of us into different fields, it is absolutely doing that through cellular changes in our bodies. We couldn't emanate this positiveness if our cells are full of negative and darkness. So our thinking changes the channels of our cells' communication, and we are changing the way our cells respond to the proper hormones and thought patterns that are generated and information passed through the brain to the body. If we can grasp this, we can understand that we are the boss of our body's health, and that we can change and heal and help others heal by embracing the light of the gods. And I will repeat that this all emanates from, in our Christian view, the power of Christ, the power of his light. And that's why recovery from any sorrow is never successful. I've never seen it successful in all of these years for anyone I have worked with without the power of the Savior at the core of all of this. And so while we talk about all of this other light stuff and the power and the thinking that we're going to change, Christ is at the center. He is at the center and core of our minds and our thinking. And we do the exercises of bringing the light into us by refusing the negative. And we do that through the discipline of faith in our thinking patterns. That's all I have time for today. I hope we can get into codependency because that's really an important topic. And so have a fabulous day. Think about these things. Look up Heal and the movie and enjoy learning. And I'll see you tomorrow.